Hey Kyle, Mike Skeen here for Racers 360. Thanks for sending in your video. Looks like some really solid laps from VIR. Let's go ahead and dive right in and see what more time we can find for you. This is the second lap, obviously a faster lap. I was going to use the first lap because it looks like, you know, some of it in maybe the very end of the lap, you caught the Corvette, and so we might go back and forth between the video a little bit at the end, but I think you do several of the things a little bit better on this lap, but they are very similar, obviously. At turn one, the only thing I would suggest is a slightly earlier turn in. It looks like the aero board got knocked down, but you want to be about halfway between the one and the aero board. The main thing is you want to be able to get right side tires up onto this curb and get there a little bit earlier, but also the time between brake release and throttle tip in should be a little bit longer. You should be carrying in and rolling in enough entry speed that there's a little bit of a pause there in the middle, and it's almost instantaneous, that you get actually a pretty good chunk of throttle right after the brake release. And again, if we can, you know, just shorten up, tighten up the radius a little by being up on that curve a little more with the right side, that would help a little bit. You do a pretty nice job getting back to full power. The exit looks really solid, so no big complaints. Just real, you know, a tiny bit earlier on the turn in, get a little bit more of the apex curb, and make sure we're timing that brake release, you know, to where we're rolling in a little bit more mid-corner speed, so that we're not immediately transitioning brake to throttle. You know, if it's that quick of a transition, then you've overslowed just a little bit on the entry. Here at 3, the main priority for me would be getting out to the right a little bit sooner. So I would try not to be quite as tight on this curb at 2, but the main thing is to get closer to the right side, you know, more at the beginning of this curb. And so you're getting most of the way out there, and this I think is better than the previous lap. This is one of the areas you did a little better, but we want to be closer to this side. And the main thing is you slow down and you're quick back to quite a bit of throttle. So if you've got this much throttle on this early in the corner, that tells me you've overslowed. And the reason you've overslowed is to do that really sharp turn in, because you're coming at it from a little bit too far left right in here. If you're a little bit more outside, to where like you would be getting close to the beginning of this curve on the right, you know, so center line of the car somewhere like right along in here. I started tipping in too early. Rather than driving kind of center line of the car this way and then turning like that, and obviously I'm exaggerating this a little bit, but you get much more steering angle at this point, and so you have to slow down more right at the turn in when you're coming at it this straight. If you let the car stay out a little bit more right, you never have to turn quite as sharp, and so you can roll in more speed through this entry area. And by rolling more speed, then you really shouldn't start picking up throttle until you're, you know, down here more closer to the apex. You might get a little bit of tip in somewhere around here right before you get to the apex, but then be, you know, hard on the throttle after that. But you're getting quite a bit of throttle about where that Corvette is, you know, pretty early in the corner. So play that through. Right there, getting to quite a bit of throttle, about half throttle right there. I would only expect to see maybe, you know, a little bit of throttle, maybe a quarter, third throttle right along in here, you know, closer to the apex. The other thing is you're effectively a little bit early here, and that's why we're going to see you get out of the throttle even more as we get to the apex. So by being in this tight, you know, you're coming pretty tight into this apex here, whereas if you're coming from a little bit wider out, you don't have to do quite as much rotation right here. You're already more straight and looking through the exit a little bit more. Not any major change. You know, it's pretty similar stuff, but you won't be doing quite as much rotation. We can see you've actually increased steering angle here. You were like 70, you know, 60, 70. And then right at the apex, you actually have to turn quite a bit more, and then you can start to straighten it up on the way out. And the amount of exit and stuff you're doing is good, but you have to stay at that partial throttle for a long time. So let's see where you actually get full. Almost to the exit. So we want to be able to get to that full throttle a lot sooner. You know, you're getting to partial throttle really early, but sometimes partial throttle too early should be an indicator actually that we're overslowing the entry. It's more about when can we get full throttle that's important. And again, if we're getting that much throttle that early and then backing off of it, but then not getting full throttle till really late, that should tell you you're too early with both the turn in and the throttle. So a little bit later apex there will help us carry more speed and be back to throttle on the exit. And then if we can compress this brake zone a little bit, your brake release won't be quite as early. I'd like to see really the brake release kind of right at the apex, and certainly no throttle until we get to the apex. And this lap was a little better. I would say you're still a little on the early side with tip in the throttle. Again, that should tell you that you're a little bit early on the initial brake. Excuse me. And if you're looking at your data, you want to see that high, that spike of brake pressure, and then for turn 4, it's really not going to stay there any long. It's going to be a peak and then right back down and kind of release. I think you have the general shape pretty good. Maybe not quite enough of a peak, something like that. But the main thing is, let me start over. But if your brake is somewhere in there, we want to move that down and compress the brake zone with a higher peak. Something like that. It's hard to do without a comparison. It's hard to know exactly how much or how little, but the main thing is you want your brake release timing to be a little bit closer to the apex, right at your minimum speed point, so that you're not picking up throttle too early. This is by going to throttle before you have made it around the apex, you're taking weight off, you're making the car turn less efficiently. I don't remember if your steering angle tightens up. Yeah, so you're actually tightening steering a little bit. You're asking the car to turn more, but you have a little bit of throttle on, which is taking weight off of the front and engaging the differential in the rear. Both of those things are making the car want to go straight. So we want the car to be, we want your brake release to be about here, at the point where you're asking the car to do the most rotation. And if you're coming off the brakes before that, that should tell you can move the whole brake zone down. So your initial brake will be later, your brake release will be later, and then the car will turn really quick right here at the apex, and you can commit to full throttle. I don't think you'll need quite as much of a lift right there, but the line here looks good, entry's nice, and you start in well. I think you just delay going back to full throttle a little bit too long. So we want to use more of this curve on the exit really as a track out curve, not so much as an exit or as an apex of the next one. Like when you get to here, you should be looking up to this curve as what is limiting your time back to power, or when you can engage throttle. But like right at this point here, you've pointed the car to where you're very, aim very far right. And at this point, when you're going to full throttle, you wouldn't even need this curve. You could go around it at this point if you wanted to. But the only real reason you're using this is to shorten to kind of straighten the next corner. But we really want it to be used as a track out of the right-hander. So, you've got the car pointed right here. You could even have gone around this curve, but we want the car to be going out and tracking out so much that it is really using the curve very early. And you're using it more as a track out curve from this right-hander. So you'll actually kind of track out before you get to the corner, if that makes sense, on the left. And then kind of wrap it around the curve. Whereas if you feel like you're just going to straighten this out, then you've given up some time at the apex and place that you could have been back to full throttle earlier back here. So if we back it up just a touch, right here, everything's pretty good to this point. But if you had gone full throttle right now, then the car would want to track out a little bit sooner. The center line of the car would come out this way, like that, rather than keeping it in tight like this. Really small, subtle stuff, but the main thing is we're trying to get back to full throttle as early as we can here. And we want this, visual here to be looking up for that as the track out curve and how early can I go back to throttle. And that means that you're actually going to have left side tires up on that curve and all the way to the grass basically before you really have to turn it to the left. You're now turning left and using it as an apex curve of the next one. We want to think of it more as the track out curve from the right-hander. So I think that'll get you back to power sooner and a little bit more speed onto the straightaway here. S is pretty good. The only small modification I might make is being just a little bit later on this. So I really don't even use this curb really in most cars. Maybe just left side a touch right there. But the main thing is I want to be parallel to the grass after the curb ends and then start my turn in. The Corvette looks like it's done a pretty good job. But the main thing is you want to be using that uphill to turn the car. And if you're on this curb too early, you can't hold it left enough. And you end up starting from a little bit more mid-track going into the right-hander. So think of this curb as not really anything important. The focus is getting all the way left parallel to the grass just for a fraction after the curb ends. Just inch it through there. So you're really close to it. You touch that left side, but the car is already starting over to the right, towards the middle of the track. We want to be able to just hold that for a fraction. And then your placement here looks pretty nice. I don't have any big complaints. I think you'll just be able to maintain a little bit more throttle through here if we do that. That's set up at the bottom. I like the way you're getting all the way over left using that really nicely. And then once you turn in here, again, the setup is great. I think you could use a little bit more steering angle right in here in order to stay on power a little bit longer. I don't know how much understeer you're getting through here, but 130 is certainly not a bad number. You're moving pretty good. But I think you can get back to throttle just a little bit longer and not get too far left over here. The bigger thing, though, that I'd be worried about time-wise is setting yourself up to get all the way over to the right and not turning in too early here. Both of these laps, we see you turn in a little bit early and then have to straighten up as you get closer to the apex. So right in here, again, make sure we get all the way right. And then we don't want to, actually your turn in is not bad time-wise or, as far as where you are down the track. The biggest problem is because you didn't get all the way to the right, it effectively makes you early. So if right side tires were all the way over here, then it wouldn't be too bad. Obviously, terrible drawing. But with right side tires right here, you start turning in, and it makes you too early to the apex. And so you're having to do more turn as you get up here. And I'll inch through, and we can watch the steering angle just to make note of that. So 24, 20, 36, 38, and then you straighten up to that 32 before it goes to 48, 40, and then 49. So there are actually a few points in there where you steer in, you straighten up, you steer in, you straighten up, and it's it's small amounts, but your actually maximum steering angle isn't until after you get through the apex, which is hurting your time back to throttle a little bit, but mostly hurting your entry speed and mid corner speed. So to back it up, when you come out of here, you got maybe just a touch wider left than I'd like to be, maybe a foot or two, and that's about how much you missed by getting to the right side over here. But that's the priority, is where you see that little low spot right in there. That is where you want to be fully track right and turning in for 10. If you don't get all the way over there, then you're going to sacrifice entry speed up here at 10. And the main thing is we want to be able to turn in one time or be adding steering down the apex, smoothly without having to add and then back up, add, back up. Every time you do one of those, it should be a mental cue that you've turned in too early. The other part of this is you could probably get away with cheating this curve a little bit more. I know you want to be really careful with the hole there, but a lot of cars can actually go over it without drooping down into that hole and causing a problem. But the main key is making sure that the car is loaded over laterally enough, it's rolling enough that it's picking up that inside tire. But if you're coming at this apex too straight and still adding steering and the car hasn't rolled over yet, then that's when you have trouble with that curb. So again, all of this stems back to getting all the way right so that you're turning in, the car is more loaded, and then that allows you to use this curb with less danger of hitting the front side of that curb. Min speed, I think, was like 94 each lap. Not a bad number. I would expect to see probably high 90s, but not a huge room for improvement. Here, the main thing I would say is getting over all the way left to start your brake zone so that you're not turning as sharp when you get up here. Also, you're a little bit on the later side. You're getting closer to that arrow before you turn in. I like to be more like the one board and closer to that first apex. So right now, the big problem is you're getting out wide too early for 12 and your minimum speed is too early for 12. But let's set it up and show you how to get there. So the braking on the uphill here, again, I want to be all the way left already. So say that's the center line of the car. That's hard to draw, but I want to be turning in at the 1 and then drawing as straight a line as possible, pretty close to the apex curve here. And then my widest point is going to be, up here closer to turn 12. Whereas right now you're turning a little bit later, staying wide of that apex, and your widest point is more like over here, but that's too early to turn in to 12. And so you end up having this coast period between those two, and you like get back to a little bit of throttle engagement, but again, that takes weight off the nose, it engages the diff, it's doing everything backwards from making the car turn efficiently. So what we're going to do here is by straightening turn 11, you get a lot more entry speed. You can brake later here, and you're rolling a lot more speed through the apex of 11. But it also helps at 12 because it makes your minimum speed later. You get out to the left later, and it gets you a better exit onto the straightaway. So as we inch it up further here, again, if you're all the way over left already and starting to turn in about here, then you can draw a much straighter line through the apex of 11. So the car will be starting to turn in already, clip that curve, and then you're out wide to the left. If you go straighter down here and out wide, one thing is you have to turn a little bit more right there. So you have to slow down more because you're adding more steering angle. And then you've got this kind of coast period from there to somewhere over here where you're getting out wide left. And so because you're out wide left too early, again, you're turning a lot right there. And you have to slow down a lot, and then you kind of accelerate back up to speed because you feel like you're too slow, but it's too early to be back on throttle all the way through 12. So we'll keep playing it forward. Again, I want to be next to this curb, maybe even touching the curb a little bit. And then once I'm getting out here, it's a little bit further down the track. So you're getting out left somewhere in this area. I want to be out left up here. And so because I'm straighter and tighter from that apex, I'm letting it out here. Again, I'm just going to exaggerate the drawing, but if you get out wide here and start turning, you're too early to 12. And so you pick up a little partial throttle in this area, but you can't really commit to it until really late towards the exit. I'm going to be braking all the way through here because I'm carrying a lot of speed, and my brake release is in this area as I'm adding a lot of steering input. And then because I'm further down the track, I have a much straighter angle through the apex. I'll like tip into throttle probably right along in here, and I'll be going full power about the apex in most cars. And staying off the apex curve also to keep it from hopping and unweighting the car. But the idea is you want to set up for having a shorter time off throttle or off brake. The coast period should be a lot shorter there. So then by being a little bit later turning in, right side tires are usually going to kind of follow this black line here, the transition between that sealer and the regular asphalt. If you find yourself with right side tires in here on this light stuff, you're probably too early. Yeah, you didn't get too much curb, so that's good, but we can see you're still not full throttle. You're adding, but you're not quite there. And then at the exit, you're full throttle. But again, if we can late apex 12 a little bit more, well, that was a little far. If we can wait for our turn in to be more like up here, we do all the rotation right at that point, then you're much straighter on approach to this, and you'll be able to get to full throttle kind of right at the apex here. So that'll straighten the, or lengthen the straightaway quite a bit. And then as we get towards the end of the brake zone here, pretty good. And I think you went a little bit deeper on the brake in this lap than you did the previous lap. Even though you had the Corvette there, maybe it was a little bit of a rabbit. But in both cases, I think we could still be a little bit later. The main reason I say that is it's too easy to turn the car through the left-hander here. So especially on the lap before, but even a little bit here, you're able to hold this left side a little bit. whereas you should be braking so hard and carrying so much momentum through here that the car wants to go more mid-track. So if you can feel like you can keep it all the way left there, then it's a little bit too slow and too early on the brake zone. We want to spend all that time at 150 or whatever we were doing. Back here, yeah, 155, 57. So probably I would say about the 2, and again, that's where it goes uphill also. If we can wait till about then, the car will really hunker down on the uphill, compress a lot, and you'll be carrying much more speed through this left-hander here. You're almost all the way off the brake already. You should be still carrying a little bit of that, and then we shouldn't see the increase after you get around the left-hander, really, not significant. You should be having to brake pretty hard all the way through. And then we want a little bit earlier turn in to make sure we get really tight on this apex curve, even up on top of it a little bit. Otherwise, I really like the line through here. Ideally, we don't want to see this little lift. So I think you can actually probably stay flat with the line that you're doing. Maybe just a touch more curve, but that actually looks pretty good. I think you can get away with it. It's just a matter of working our way up to it. And then you're just a fraction early turning in here. We want to make sure we're waiting until we get past the end of the painted curve there, and you're starting kind of halfway down or in the first half of that painted curve. So not drastic, but it also makes you a little bit early on the brakes here. So you end up over slowing the car at this point, and then you again tip back into throttle a little bit early, and the car doesn't want to push out to the left here. You're able to keep it kind of down here with right sides on the lighter pavement, which is too far right here in the middle of hog pen. And so when you can do that, that means that you're not carrying enough speed down the downhill portion here. So a little bit later turn in at the top, trying to be on throttle at the turn in and then braking just after that, braking over the curve just like you're doing, but with the release being a little bit later. And we don't want to make 2 brake zones out of it. The brake release should be right around in here. And then I would expect to see minimum speeds probably around 80, 82, somewhere in there. And that extra speed will carry the car out over here to the left a little bit more. Throttle application will be about the same. And don't worry so much about the last apex. Just get your eyes up early, looking for the track out to let the car all the way out as early as you can. But I think those chunks will get you a pretty good hunk of time there. So as far as overall lap time, I think turn 3 is going to be a big chunk. Getting back to power a little bit earlier at 5 onto into the lower snake. Uphill S's is pretty fast. You're doing a really solid job there. I think tiny little bit, but not a huge chunk. Turn 10 is going to be a pretty good one actually. Biggest chunk probably is turn 11 and 12. You're giving up a lot on the entry by doing that later turn in and getting out wide left too early. And then you're giving up exit speed because of it. So a little bit later on the brakes, straighter through 11, but then setting it up to be a later turn in the 12s that were back to power a lot earlier onto the straight. A little bit of time braking for 14. If we can get to that 2 marker, it's going to be a couple of tenths. Making sure you're really tight to the curb at 14, and then down the hill into hog pen a little bit later on the brake, but mostly keeping the minimum speed up a little bit so that the car's momentum carries it out a little bit more left at the bottom of the hill at that compression. So yeah, pretty good amount of time. I would say there's probably a 56 in there. But best of luck. Let us know. I don't know if you're getting back out there this year, but best of luck if you do, and see you next time. Thanks.